Police discover hidden tunnel under a famous restaurant. They turn pale when they see what's inside. Officer Martin Reyes leaned back in his patrol car, enjoying the quiet hum of a routine shift. The early afternoon sun reflected off the storefronts lining the main street, casting long shadows over the sidewalks. It was a typical day in this small suburban town, peaceful, predictable, and far removed from the chaos of big city life. Or so it seemed. The radio crackled to life, breaking the calm. Unit 302, we've received another complaint about the smell near the diner on Lincoln Avenue. Multiple callers say it's getting worse. Reyes sighed and grabbed the receiver. 10-4, dispatch. I'm on my way. This wasn't the first time he'd been called to investigate complaints about the smell. Over the past few weeks, the stench had been the talk of the neighborhood, a grotesque mix of rotting garbage and something even fouler. Locals had begun avoiding the area entirely, and the reports kept piling up. Reyes figured it was probably a backed-up grease trap or maybe a dead animal behind the restaurant. Nothing unusual. As he drove toward the diner, Reyes noticed how quiet the usually bustling neighborhood had become. Fewer cars were parked on the street, and the outdoor tables of nearby cafes sat empty. Even from a block away, the rancid smell began to seep into his car. He wrinkled his nose and rolled up the windows, muttering under his breath about whoever was responsible for the mess. When he arrived, a small group of residents stood gathered on the sidewalk, their faces etched with concern. Reyes stepped out of his car, and the stench hit him like a punch to the gut. It was worse than he'd imagined, thick, putrid, and almost tangible, as if the air itself were rotting. "Officer Reyes," an elderly man called out, waving him over. "You've got to do something about this. It's unbearable." Reyes approached the group, trying to suppress his own gag reflex. "I know, sir. We've been getting reports. Have you noticed anything unusual other than the smell?" The man hesitated, his eyes darting toward the restaurant. "It's not just the smell. Strange things have been happening. Trucks coming in the middle of the night. They park out back, but I've never seen them unload anything. And the workers, they're acting off, nervous, like they're hiding something." Reyes raised an eyebrow. "You're sure about this?" The man nodded fervently. "I'm not the only one who's noticed. Ask anyone around here. Something's not right." A middle-aged woman chimed in, her voice trembling. "I used to go there all the time, but now, the staff won't even make eye contact, and the smell, it's like it's coming from inside the building." Reyes frowned, his instincts kicking in. He turned toward the restaurant, its iconic red and white sign glowing cheerfully, an odd contrast to the grim scene outside. "I'll take a look," he said, heading toward the entrance. The door to the diner swung open with a creak, and Reyes stepped inside. The air was thick and heavy, the smell even more oppressive indoors. Despite it being lunchtime, the dining area was nearly empty. A couple of customers sat hunched over their meals, their faces pale and pinched. Reyes approached the counter, where the manager was wiping down a tray. The man was in his late 30s, stocky, with a harried expression that only deepened when he saw the officer. "Afternoon," Reyes said, keeping his tone casual. "We've had a lot of complaints about the smell coming from this place. Mind telling me what's going on?" The manager straightened up, forcing a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "It's nothing, officer. Just a plumbing issue. We've got someone coming to fix it." Reyes studied the man's face, noting the slight tremor in his hands and the way his gaze flickered to the side, avoiding direct eye contact. "Plumbing issue, huh? You've been saying that for weeks, but the smell's only getting worse." The manager's smile faltered. "We're working on it. These things take time." Reyes leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. "I spoke to some of your neighbors. They mentioned trucks coming in late at night. What's that about?" The manager stiffened, his expression briefly flashing with something Reyes couldn't quite place. Fear? Annoyance? "Just supply deliveries," he said quickly. "Nothing unusual." Before Reyes could press further, a loud crash echoed from the kitchen. He turned his head sharply, catching a glimpse of a nervous employee scrambling to pick up a fallen tray. The other workers behind the counter seemed equally on edge, their movements rushed and jittery. "Your staff seems awfully jumpy," Reyes said, his eyes narrowing. The manager waved a hand dismissively. It's a busy day. People are stressed. Reyes didn't buy it. The atmosphere in the restaurant was thick with unease, and the manager's defensive demeanor only deepened his suspicion. "I'll need to take a look around," Reyes said, stepping toward the kitchen. "Wait," the manager blurted, stepping in front of him. "You can't, it's not safe back there. The plumbing issue, you know. We don't want anyone getting hurt." Reyes raised an eyebrow. "I'm not here to debate safety protocols. Move aside." Reluctantly, the manager stepped back, his face pale and drawn. Reyes pushed through the swinging doors into the kitchen. The scene inside was chaotic. The workers avoided his gaze, their movements clumsy as they busied themselves with mundane tasks. A sour, metallic smell hung in the air, distinct from the usual grease and fried chicken odors. Reyes's gaze swept the room, landing on a door at the far end marked "Storage." He walked toward it, his boots echoing against the tiled floor. As he reached for the handle, a soft voice stopped him. "Officer?" Reyes turned to see an elderly woman standing near the counter, clutching a worn handbag. She looked frail, her face lined with worry. "Ma'am, is everything all right?" She hesitated, glancing nervously at the staff before leaning in close. "I don't come here often anymore. The workers, they're hiding something, and that smell. It's not just food. Something's rotting in this place." Reyes felt a chill creep up his spine. The woman's words echoed what the neighbors outside had said. Whatever was going on here, it wasn't just a plumbing issue. "Thank you," he said softly. "I'll take care of it." He turned back to the storage door, determination hardening his resolve. Whatever was behind it, he was going to find out. As Officer Reyes stepped out of the kitchen, the oppressive stench seemed to cling to him like an unwelcome guest. The manager had retreated to his office, leaving the staff to shoot nervous glances his way. The whole situation felt off, more than a bad plumbing issue or careless garbage disposal. Reyes decided it was time to check the perimeter. Circling to the back of the building, Reyes immediately noticed a change. The smell that had permeated the restaurant intensified tenfold, becoming almost unbearable. He covered his nose and mouth with a handkerchief and pressed on. The area behind the diner was an alley lined with overflowing dumpsters, grease-stained pavement, and piles of discarded cardboard. His eyes narrowed as he spotted something unusual. Amidst the grime and clutter, a patch of ground stood out, scrubbed clean and suspiciously free of the filth surrounding it. Reyes crouched down, running a gloved hand over the slick surface. "Too clean," he muttered to himself. As he scanned the area, his attention was drawn to a stack of fry boxes piled against the wall. Something about their placement seemed deliberate, as though they were meant to conceal something. Reyes stepped closer, his boots crunching on loose gravel. He moved the boxes aside, revealing a rusted metal door embedded in the wall. The door was small, almost unnoticeable, and didn't match the clean, corporate aesthetic of the rest of the building. He tested the handle, but it wouldn't budge. Reyes frowned. "What are you hiding back here?" He radioed for backup, but as he waited, curiosity got the better of him. Using his flashlight, he examined the edges of the door and found scrape marks on the concrete floor, as if the door had been opened recently. A sound from behind startled him. He spun around, flashlight raised, to see the manager standing a few feet away, his face pale and drawn. "Officer, what are you doing back here?" the manager asked, his voice strained. "Investigating," Reyes replied curtly. "What's behind this door?" The manager hesitated, his gaze flickering between Reyes and the door. "That's just an old storage room. Nothing important." Reyes didn't believe him for a second. "Then you won't mind if I take a look?" Before the manager could respond, Reyes delivered a solid kick to the door. The old, rusted hinges groaned before giving way, and the door creaked open, releasing a wave of foul air that made Reyes gag. Behind the door was a narrow staircase descending into darkness. The smell emanating from below was almost unbearable, a sickening mix of rot and decay. Reyes turned to the manager, who was visibly shaking. "Stay right here," he ordered, stepping into the stairwell. Reyes descended the stairs cautiously, his flashlight cutting through the oppressive darkness. The walls of the stairwell were damp, streaked with grime and something that looked disturbingly like mold. The stench grew stronger with each step, making it harder to breathe. The staircase opened into a cavernous basement, dimly lit by a single flickering bulb. The space was far larger than Reyes had anticipated, extending well beyond the footprint of the restaurant above. The concrete floor was slick with moisture, and the walls were stained with years of neglect. Scattered across the room were piles of garbage, rotting food, grease-soaked rags, and unidentifiable heaps of refuse. But amidst the chaos, Reyes noticed something even more unsettling: industrial freezers and plastic storage crates stacked along the far wall. He approached the freezers, his boots squelching with every step. The smell was overpowering now, and Reyes had to fight the urge to retch. One of the freezers was slightly ajar, its contents partially visible. He gripped the handle and pulled it open. Inside were bags of meat, far more than the restaurant would need for normal operations. Some of the packages were labeled, but others weren't, their contents unclear. Reyes frowned, unease gnawing at his gut. As he moved to inspect the crates, his flashlight caught something unusual. A narrow tunnel, carved into the far wall, was partially hidden behind a stack of rotting boxes. The entrance was roughly cut, its edges jagged, as though it had been hastily constructed. Reyes's heart raced as he approached the tunnel. "This isn't on any blueprint," he muttered. The tunnel was barely wide enough to walk through, the walls lined with wooden supports that looked haphazardly installed. Tracks ran along the floor, suggesting something heavy had been transported through here recently. Reyes stepped into the tunnel, his flashlight barely illuminating the path ahead. The air grew colder, and the smell of decay intensified. His boots sank slightly into the muck with every step, and the sound of dripping water echoed in the darkness. After a few minutes of walking, Reyes stumbled upon a small room carved into the side of the tunnel. Inside, he found an assortment of tools, bags of concrete, and a workbench cluttered with blueprints and ledgers. He flipped through the blueprints, his flashlight casting shadows across the page. They detailed an elaborate underground network, far larger than what he had seen so far. The ledgers, meanwhile, listed shipments of materials, with cryptic notes that suggested something illegal. Reyes's gut twisted. This wasn't just a storage basement. This was part of a larger operation. A sudden noise from deeper within the tunnel made him freeze. It sounded like the scrape of metal against stone, followed by muffled voices. Reyes turned off his flashlight, plunging himself into darkness. He strained his ears, trying to pinpoint the source of the sound. The voices grew louder, accompanied by the sound of footsteps. Reyes pressed himself against the wall, his hand instinctively reaching for his sidearm. Two figures emerged from the shadows, their silhouettes barely visible. They were carrying a crate between them, their movements hurried and deliberate. Reyes stayed still, holding his breath as they passed by, their conversation muted but tense. Once they were out of earshot, Reyes turned his flashlight back on and inspected the ground where they had walked. The crate they were carrying had left faint drag marks in the muck, leading further into the tunnel. Reyes hesitated, his instincts screaming at him to call for backup, but he couldn't ignore the urgency of the situation. Whatever was happening here, it was bigger than he'd anticipated. He followed the drag marks deeper into the tunnel, his flashlight flickering as the air grew colder and the smell of decay became almost unbearable. What awaited him at the end of the tunnel was something he couldn't have prepared for. Officer Reyes moved deeper into the tunnel, his heart pounding with each step. The faint drag marks on the ground guided him, though his instincts screamed at him to turn back. The air was heavy, thick with the stench of decay, making every breath a struggle. Reyes tightened his grip on his flashlight, its beam cutting through the oppressive darkness. The tunnel suddenly opened into a larger underground chamber. Reyes froze as his light revealed the scene before him. Crates were stacked against the walls, their markings inconsistent. Some bore shipping company logos, while others were blank. A table in the center of the room was covered with bags of powder, scales, and other paraphernalia that Reyes immediately recognized. It was a makeshift drug processing lab. He approached the table cautiously, his flashlight trembling slightly. Sealed bags of white powder gleamed under the beam, and Reyes didn't need a lab test to know what they contained. Cocaine, likely in massive quantities. But that wasn't all. As Reyes scanned the room, his light caught something in the corner that sent a chill down his spine. A large plastic tarp covered a pile of objects, the edges of the material slick with something dark and wet. Reyes stepped closer, his stomach churning as he pulled back the tarp. Underneath were dozens of packages wrapped in black plastic, but mixed among them were items far more horrifying. Bones. Human bones, cleaned and piled neatly. Reyes's hand flew to his mouth as bile rose in his throat. This wasn't just a drug smuggling operation. Something far darker was happening here. Before he could investigate further, a sound from the tunnel snapped his attention back. Voices, low and urgent, echoed toward him. Reyes turned off his flashlight and ducked behind one of the crates, straining to listen. The voices grew louder, accompanied by the shuffle of footsteps. 2 men entered the chamber, their faces obscured by the dim light. One of them carried a clipboard, while the other held a crowbar. They moved with the confidence of people who knew the space well, their conversation barely audible over the pounding of Reyes' heart. "You sure the shipment's secure?" one of them asked, his voice gruff. "Yeah," the other replied, setting the clipboard on the table. "But we need to move faster. The boss is getting nervous about all the complaints. If the cops catch wind of this—" He let the sentence hang ominously. Reyes's pulse quickened. They didn't know he was there. Yet. He slowly reached for his radio, careful not to make a sound. He pressed the button, whispering as softly as he could. "This is Officer Reyes. I need immediate backup at the diner on Lincoln Avenue. Suspected drug operation in progress. Possible homicide evidence found. Proceed with caution." The men were still talking, oblivious to his presence. Reyes scanned the room, looking for an exit or any cover he could use if things went south. He had no intention of engaging 2 potentially armed suspects on his own. As he moved slightly to reposition, his boot scraped against the floor, sending a faint noise echoing through the chamber. Both men froze. "Did you hear that?" one of them whispered, his grip tightening on the crowbar. "Yeah," the other said, pulling a pistol from his waistband. "Check it out." Reyes's breath hitched as the man with the gun began to walk toward his hiding spot. He knew he was out of time. Slowly, he rose from behind the crate, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. "Police!" Reyes shouted, drawing his weapon. "Drop the gun and put your hands in the air." The man with the pistol turned, his eyes wide with surprise, but instead of complying, he raised his weapon. Reyes fired first, the shot ringing out and reverberating through the tunnel. The man dropped his gun and crumpled to the ground with a groan. The second man swung his crowbar wildly, rushing toward Reyes. Reyes sidestepped and struck him with the butt of his flashlight, sending the man sprawling. Before he could get up, Reyes had him cuffed. "Stay down!" Reyes barked, his adrenaline surging as he checked to make sure both suspects were subdued. The man he had shot was alive but clutching his shoulder in pain. Reyes quickly secured him as well, then radioed again for backup. "Shots fired. 2 suspects in custody. Send medical assistance." Minutes felt like hours as Reyes waited for reinforcements. He kept his gun trained on the suspects, his mind racing with what he had uncovered. The drugs alone were a major bust, but the presence of human remains suggested something far more sinister: trafficking, murder, or worse. Finally, the sound of footsteps echoed from the tunnel, and Reyes turned to see flashlights approaching. A team of officers entered the chamber, their expressions shifting from confusion to horror as they took in the scene. "What the hell is this?" one officer muttered, staring at the table covered in drugs and the tarp in the corner. "Evidence," Reyes said grimly. "Secure the area. We've got a lot to process." The suspects were handed off to other officers who led them out of the tunnel toward waiting squad cars. Reyes remained behind, watching as the forensic team began to catalog the evidence. The room felt suffocating, the weight of what they had uncovered pressing down on everyone present. As Reyes emerged from the tunnel, the night air hit him like a welcome relief. The parking lot was a flurry of activity. Police cars, ambulances, and news vans crowded the space, their lights painting the scene in red and blue. The diner was now a full-blown crime scene, yellow tape cordoning off the building. Neighbors stood in clusters, their faces a mix of curiosity and fear as they watched the chaos unfold. Reyes made his way to his sergeant, who was standing near the entrance, speaking with detectives. "Good work, Reyes," the sergeant said, clapping him on the shoulder. "This is one of the biggest busts we've had in years. Drugs, counterfeit money, human remains. You just uncovered a massive operation." Reyes nodded, though he felt little satisfaction. The discovery raised more questions than answers. Who was behind this? How long had it been going on? And what else might be hidden in those tunnels? As the sergeant turned back to the detectives, Reyes leaned against his patrol car, exhaustion finally setting in. He knew this case would take months to unravel, but one thing was clear. The stench that had plagued the neighborhood wasn't just a nuisance, it had been a warning. The suspects were transported to the station, where detectives immediately began the grueling process of interrogation. Officer Reyes sat in on the questioning, his mind racing with the implications of what he had discovered. The man Reyes had shot in the shoulder was the first to crack under pressure. His name was Victor Ortega, a low-level operative in what he described as a massive criminal syndicate. Ortega revealed that the diner basement and tunnels were part of a larger network used to smuggle drugs, counterfeit money, and other illicit goods across state lines. "It wasn't supposed to get this messy," Ortega muttered, his voice trembling. "We only used the tunnels for storage and transport. The bones. Those weren't part of the plan." Reyes' stomach churned at the mention of the remains. "Whose bones are they?" he demanded. Ortega hesitated, beads of sweat forming on his brow. "I don't know all the details. Some of the higher-ups. They used the tunnels for other things. People who got in the way. They'd disappear." The room fell silent as the weight of his words sank in. Reyes clenched his fists, a mixture of anger and dread coursing through him. This wasn't just a drug operation. It was a killing ground for anyone who posed a threat to the syndicate. Further interrogation of the second suspect revealed more about the operation. The manager of the diner, identified as Greg Lewis, was a key player, using his position to facilitate the movement of goods and keep prying eyes away. He had recruited several employees, paying them off to keep quiet or actively assist in the smuggling operation. "He's the one who built the tunnel," the second suspect admitted. "Well, him and some contractors who didn't ask questions. It's deeper than you think. There's another entrance, but only Lewis knows where it is." The evidence against Greg Lewis was overwhelming. Reyes and a team of detectives arrived at the manager's home late that night with a warrant in hand. Lewis's face went pale as he opened the door, his attempt at feigning innocence crumbling under the weight of their accusations. A search of his home revealed ledgers detailing shipments, financial records connecting him to known criminal organizations, and encrypted messages on his phone coordinating tunnel construction and deliveries. "You don't understand," Lewis protested as he was handcuffed. "They made me do it. I didn't have a choice." Reyes stared at him, disgusted. "You had a choice every time you let those trucks come in, every time you ignored what was happening under your restaurant. Save it for the judge." As the investigation continued, the full extent of the operation came to light. The tunnel beneath the diner was part of an interconnected network stretching to other locations, used to smuggle goods across state and even national borders. The human remains found in the chamber were identified as victims who had either crossed the syndicate or been caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. The town was shaken by the revelations. The once popular diner was now a crime scene, its cheerful red and white sign a haunting reminder of the horrors hidden beneath. News vans swarmed the area, broadcasting updates on the case and interviewing stunned residents. "I can't believe this was happening right under our noses," one neighbor said, her voice trembling. "We thought it was just a smell. We never imagined." Reyes, too, struggled to process everything. The images of the bones, the crates of drugs, and the shadowy tunnel haunted his thoughts. He knew the case was far from over. The syndicate was vast, and Lewis was just one cog in the machine. In the weeks that followed, the diner was demolished. The tunnels sealed off as investigators continued to map the underground network. The arrests of Lewis and his accomplices were just the beginning. The FBI was brought in to pursue the syndicate on a larger scale, using the evidence Reyes had uncovered to dismantle their operations piece by piece. For Reyes, the case was a stark reminder of the darkness that could hide in plain sight. A place as ordinary as a fast food restaurant had been a front for unimaginable crime. Standing in the now vacant lot where the diner once stood, Reyes took a deep breath, the air free of the stench that had plagued the neighborhood for weeks. He felt a sense of relief, but also a lingering unease. This time, they had uncovered the truth. But how many other secrets were still buried, waiting to be discovered? If this story had you on the edge of your seat, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another thrilling investigation like this one. What would you have done if you were Officer Reyes, faced with that eerie tunnel? Share your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And remember, sometimes the most ordinary places can hide the darkest secrets. Stay curious, stay safe, and we'll see you in the next video.